Welcome to World Affairs Today, brought to you by the World Affairs Council, Washington, D.C., a leading forum for global education and international affairs.
On behalf of the Board of Directors of the World Affairs Council, Washington, D.C., it's my pleasure to welcome you here this evening as we discuss the new book, 21 Trends for the 21st Century, Out of the Trenches and Into the Future, with its author, Gary Marx. I'm Heidi Shoup, President of the Council, and before we introduce Mr. Marx, I would like to take the opportunity to point out that with this program, the Council begins a new series of presentations with authors, policy experts, corporate leaders, educators, and others, whose topics will focus on global education and the importance of teaching our children about the world, its peoples, its cultures, its economies, its geography. In short, providing America's youth with a better understanding of the world in which they will live, work, and hopefully lead, but no doubt will have to cope in the 21st century. Our children are growing up in a world fundamentally different from that in which many of us in the audience tonight grew up. Our children must be prepared for the global challenges ahead. The World Affairs Council, Washington, D.C., with its global education programming for teachers and students throughout the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area and nationwide, is working to raise awareness of the importance of global education and to do something about it. To tell you a little bit about the Council's global education programs, I will ask Amanda Stamp, the Council's Global Education Director, to step up and tell us a little bit about her programs. Amanda?
Thank you, Heidi. The World Affairs Council has been engaging high school students and teachers for over 25 years. We have a number of programs for students which give them an opportunity to not only learn and hear from experts, but to give them a hands-on experience in learning about these topics. These programs include our Young Ambassador series that goes to Costa Rica each summer, our Youth Forum series, and our International Affairs Leadership Academy each summer, just to name a few. We also have a number of programs for educators which help them bring global education into the classroom. Throughout the year, we host day-long professional development workshops on international topics and a monthly webinar series which connects teachers and students to experts in the front lines of major international events as they happen. And of course, there is our week-long Summer Institute on International Affairs, which gives educators the opportunity to take an in-depth look into the issues facing the world today. This week happens to be our institute, and we are happy to have several of our participants here this evening. Our world is changing and growing smaller each day. Globalization is not going anywhere, and as a result, we need to make sure our students are prepared to enter the world with the necessary knowledge and skills to compete in the new global economy. The conversation about the importance of global education needs to not only happen within our schools and our classrooms, but at every level within our nation. To help build this much-needed conversation and discussion, WAC DC will be holding a series of public programs, including the one this evening, with experts and practitioners in the field of global education. We look forward to the discussion this program and others bring, and the conversations that come out of that, both tonight and in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Amanda. We do have some information about our programs on the registration desk at the front, and much more is located on our website, which is www.worldaffairsdc.org. Now let us turn to our speaker. Gary Marx has served education and other organizations at all levels, from local to international. He is a veteran, former senior executive for the American Association of School Administrators, and is currently president of the Center for Public Outreach. He is a noted author, educator, speaker, and future thinker who lectures worldwide. He has been recognized with Lifetime Achievement Awards from organizations such as the National School Public Relations Association and the American Association of School Administrators. 21 Trends is a groundbreaking book that has implications for education, communities, and the whole society. This is a go-to guide for thinking and planning and looks at the changes in technology, demographics, environment, and more that are coming faster and more dramatically today than at any time in human history. I think we are in for an exciting discussion, so let us begin. If you wish to tweet, and we encourage you to do so, the hashtag is 21Trends. So, following his remarks, he will take questions, so please wait for the microphone to be passed to you before you begin speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here tonight at this event. I'm so pleased to be with you at the World Affairs Council here in Washington, D.C., and I appreciate the work of this council and the councils across this country and what they do to help us become a little more educated about what's happening on this planet, because so often we only see about as far as the horizon, or sometimes we get the impression that the world is only the top of our desk because it's the thing we see most often. So I thank you so much, and I appreciate very much being a part of this program. When I was a kid, when I was knee-high to a grasshopper, I was into microscopes and telescopes. I had a microscope, and I looked at the inside of everything I could find, in nature, around the house, everywhere. I'd put it under the microscope, and I loved it. And then one of my uncles gave me a telescope. It was made of cardboard, but I could see the craters in the moon. And from the time I was maybe 10 years old, I've been interested in everything from the most minute to the farthest reaches of outer space. And I'll bet everybody in this room tonight suffers from that same malady, being interested in everything, curious. When I moved into education, I talked with the CEO of an education organization who said, we'd really like to have you interpret the organization to society. And I said, that's very, very important to do. But at the same time, maybe what we need to do is interpret society to the organization to make the circle complete. And that's why I've written 21 Trends for the 21st Century and why I've written previous trends book and done previous studies. Most of you know or know of, some of you probably knew personally, Buckminster Fuller, that famous architect, philosopher, futurist, author. And he wrote this little book back in the late 60s called Operator's Manual for Spaceship Earth. And he describes all of us as passengers on this spaceship that is zipping through space. And we need to take care of this planet, because if we don't, there is not another one nearby that would sustain us. So we'd better take care of what we have here if we want to have a tomorrow. Buckminster Fuller is a very important force, not only in education, but I think as we think about the future, as we think about global education. A few observations as we think through the big picture. And we need to think in terms of the big picture. It's very important for us to see what we do for a living, what we do in our communities, what we do in our nation in context. We need to form perspective. Too often, we're blinded by spending too much time in our own trenches. I had an uncle who was a soldier in World War I, and I remember him talking about digging those trenches on the fronts. And the officers would come through and say, dig those trenches even deeper, it'll protect you from the other side. It's a fact that in any field, we can dig trenches. Sometimes we dig trenches to protect ourselves from new ideas. Sometimes we dig trenches to protect ourselves from new ideas, from new cultures and the understanding of other nations in the world. Sometimes we dig trenches to protect the status quo. So I want to take this idea of my uncle in those trenches on the front line a little bit further and speculate that at some point somebody said, there's not much happening above, let me take a ladder and look around and see what's going on. So he got a ladder, put it up against the edge of the trench, walked to the top, and everything was quite peaceful. So he went down and he reported, nothing going on up there. Everything is quite peaceful. I think we've won the battle, but we've lost the war. because everyone else has moved on and left us behind. And that's what happens when we become too entrenched. And I believe for those of us involved in education, in international affairs, it's very important that we indeed help people come along with us and to understand what's happening in the world. We're into the easy. We want something that we can describe, especially in education, in a box score. You know, we love those football scores and basketball scores and hockey scores. There are some of you who may be rejoicing in today's hockey score, not hockey score, but soccer score with the World Cup, and some of you who might not. But we want everything easy to understand. We want to know who's the winner, who's the loser, how many strongly agree, how many strongly disagree, us versus them. We watch television programs, you know, that take place sort of across a table at people on one extreme arguing with somebody on the other extreme. What about the people in the middle? What about the thoughtful people who are trying to understand the whole issue? Some of you, I'm sure, knew Harlan Cleveland. Harlan Cleveland was, of course, a terrific educator, a philosopher, a futurist, and an author. Harlan used to come to the World Future Society conference meetings, and I spent some time with him. Interesting, he said that when he was president of the University of Hawaii, people would come into his office and say, "Harlan, you know, there are two sides to every issue." He said, "I really got tired of hearing that. So I started counting the number of sides there are to an issue." So he said, "I came up with an average of 5.3. So between black and white, there are lots of shades of gray. Now, searching for this higher ground. We have someone here from, I think, the military tonight. And we have people in executive positions. We have people who work for the government. We have students, educators. We're always looking for that higher ground. In some cases, we find it by flying a drone over the territory. We take a hill, you know, and that way we can see the battlefield in front of us. We need to back off so that we see things, as we said earlier, in context, that we have that perspective. And then when we identify all of those forces in society, or at least some of them, some of those tendencies, we ask, what are the implications for us? Whether we run a school or a school system or a college or a university or a World Affairs Council, or whether we do business, whatever we do, run a government, are involved in our community. We ask, what are the implications of these massive political, economic, social, technological, demographic, environmental trends? Always heading for higher ground. Now, before we talk about a few of these trends, I want to give you the lay of the land in this book, 21 Trends for the 21st Century, Out of the Trenches and Into the Future. So now you get the idea about why we called it Out of the Trenches and Into the Future. We have a demographic sphere. And in the demographic sphere, there are 3 chapters, each devoted to a trend. The generations trend, the flow of generations. There's a trend devoted to diversity, another trend devoted to aging. In the technology sphere, we address, of course, technology. In the previous trends book that I wrote, I had identity and privacy embedded in technology. It's become such a big issue today, so much concern raised about identity and privacy, that we broke it out as a separate trend. We have an economic, energy, environment sphere. And within that sphere, we have the economy, of course, jobs and careers, energy, environmental, planetary security, and we have sustainability. Now, here's a place. If you look at the economy, if you look at energy and the environment, these are concerns. There are trends embedded in all of these areas that are going to require multinational focus, multinational concern if we hope to deal with them. And we have to deal with many of these trends across generations. Can we do that in a highly polarized nation, highly polarized world? We're going to need to if we hope to have a future. There's an education and learning sphere. And in that sphere, we focus on personalization, on ingenuity, releasing the ingenuity of people, and we focus on the depth, breadth, and purposes of education. There's an international global sphere, and that sphere encompasses that trend. It is the world, encapsulated here. And of course, everything else that goes on in this book, in fact, has something to do with global studies. It has a great deal to do with having a global future. We have a public and personal leadership sphere, and in that sphere we have trends devoted to polarization, authority, how we get it, how we use it, who is an authority, how did they gain that authority. We have an ethics trend, a continuous improvement trend. A well-being trend, a sphere, sort of rounds out the categories. And in the well-being sphere, we discuss poverty, we discuss scarcity versus abundance, and personal meaning and work-life balance. Dave Perkins is at Harvard, and he's a thinking, reasoning, and problem-solving expert. And he suggests that we do sampling. And I'm going to do some of that. We're not going to talk about all 21 of the trends tonight. We're going to focus on about 4 of them and look at some interconnections among them. Now, if you take a look at these 21 trends that we've just introduced very quickly, if we look at the white spaces between those trends, if you look at the overlap, if we look at the convergence, you can find that we might discover that the Arab Spring was not maybe predictable, but it might have been projectable, because we had a number of trends that were intersecting, they were converging. So think about it. We had the generations trend, the millennial generation. We have a group of people, not everybody, but certain generations have certain characteristics. And for the millennial generation, it's a commitment to solving the problems of the world, dealing with the injustices. So you have that trend. Another trend is the jobs and careers trend. You have groups of people who go out, they get an education, they can't find a job. They can't find an opportunity to use their talents, their abilities. And that can be very frustrating. We have the authority sphere. People are concerned often about how people are using their authority. They feel that they don't have a voice in the decisions that people are making about them and their lives. And then the technology trend, which also merges with the others. And there with social media, we can convene hordes of people on almost a moment's notice to get together to sing an anthem or to bring down a regime. So all of these trends coming together, and I think that led to the Arab Spring. And you can take a look at other trends. You can look at those white spaces between and among them, and you can find projectable events, projectable directions that we might be taking. Well, taking advice from Dave Perkins at Harvard, here are the samples we're going to do tonight. And as we talk about them, we'll be touching on other shores here, other trends. We'll be talking about demographics. We're going to be in very short order because we have about 30 minutes to speak. We're going to be talking about the economy and jobs. We're going to be talking about education and learning, and wrapping it up with a focus on international and global issues. There are a number of things that you already know. Some, I hope it helps if we put them in some kind of context, a larger context. The demographic sphere, first of all, where we said, as you recall, we address aging, diversity, and generations. A few startling facts. Beginning in 2011, how many boomers do we have in the room? We have quite a few boomers. Do we have very many millennials in the room? Let's see the hands of millennials. I think we're pretty much balanced. Are there any silent generation people in the room? Okay. GI generation? Okay. And the generation beyond the millennials, I'm calling Generation E for equilibrium, because things are moving so fast that we're going to have to cut our losses, consolidate our gains at some point. And that generation will be somewhat similar to the silent generation that followed the GI generation. Anyway, in 2011, boomers started turning 65 at the rate of about 10,000 a day, and that's going to take place for about 30 years. Can you imagine that? Amazing. Now, as if by some demographic magic, the very next year, in 2012, the oldest of the millennials started turning 30. I'm amazed by that, and yet it's been happening for generations. It's been happening for millennia. It's been happening for centuries. One group is moving off the stage, another group is coming on the stage. Now, these millennials will be from about 27 to 48 years of age in 2030. In about 2050, they will be in prime time, ages 47 to 68. They will hold most of the top corner offices, if corner offices even exist at that time. If you study millennials, you probably have concluded that there probably aren't going to be a lot of corner offices because people are all going to be collaborating with each other, working together. But they will hold most of the prime political appointed and elected positions in this country and in many others. So if you want to see the future, take a look at the students in our schools and colleges today. They will inherit the future of this country and many others. Now, here are a few other demographic realities, and you're aware of many of these. Now this is just common sense, I realize this, but when life expectancies and median ages go up, and when birth rates and death rates go down, a society becomes inevitably older. And if we need an example, take a look at Japan. Average life expectancy in Japan in 2000 was 81 years. That's a fairly hefty average life expectancy. But move out to 2050, the average, I want to emphasize, average life expectancy in Japan is expected to be 92. Now, we have a case here in this part of the trend we're talking about of people not having many kids, but living longer. Now let's flip that over to when life expectancies and median ages go down, and when birth rates and death rates go up, societies generally, inevitably become younger. Nigeria, case in point. Life expectancy in 2000 was about 45 years of age. 45 in Nigeria back in 2000, expected to go up to 68 in 2050. Now, all of this is barring some unforeseen circumstances. There could be a pandemic, there could be some lethal combat of some kind, some cataclysmic event that we don't know about at the moment. But you know, given that we don't have one of those occurrences, and we probably will in some form, don't have an asteroid strike some part of the world and wipe out our atmosphere, and I'm not trying to be bleak here, but all of these things are part of planetary security. When you think of natural concerns and then human-created concerns. Here's another of these startling demographic facts. And I'm sure you're aware of this, but in the United States, non-Hispanic whites will become less than 50% of our total population by 2043. Let me repeat that. Non-Hispanic whites in the United States will become less than 50% of the total population by 2043, and I don't make this up. This is from the U.S. Census Bureau, reinforced by Bill Fry at the Brookings Institution, who studied all these numbers. So if you think about our motto, e pluribus unum, we are becoming that. And the traditional majorities will no longer be the majorities. You know, we'll become a nation of minorities, groups that are less than 50% of the population. This is already happening, of course, in a number of states and a lot of communities all over this country. And it's been happening with children up to age 1 since July 1st of 2011, up through age 5 this year. If you want to look at 18 and under, if you're involved in elementary and secondary education, by 2018 for the nation. If you're looking at colleges and universities, of course we have students of all ages, but the primary group of students in many colleges and universities up to 18 through 29 by 2027. And those of us 65 plus after 2060. So that's another of those startling facts that I think we're all aware of, but I think it's sometimes interesting to put them in one spot, turn them over, look at them, think about them. Let's move briefly into the economic sphere where, as we said earlier, we've contained the economy trend, the jobs and careers trend, the lifestyles trends. Now here's the one that I think gets our attention. We've just been through a great recession. As we were going into that great recession, Jeff Immelt, who's the CEO at General Electric, said the economic crisis doesn't represent a cycle. It represents a reset. It's an emotional, social, and economic reset. Now, resets have happened after every major economic event in the history of this country. If you go back to the long depression that arguably got underway in the 1870s, if you go back to the Great Depression that arguably got going in the late 20s and early 30s, and then I'm not even going to start the conversation of when it actually ended. You know, that's a debate in itself. And if you look at the Great Recession that we've been through or are going through, what happens is that our lifestyles and our technologies outgrow our infrastructure. So we need to reset our infrastructure. We have a neighbor who's an executive with the American Society of Civil Engineers, American Society of Civil Engineers, ASCE. They do a study fairly frequently, every year or two, on America's physical infrastructure. They look at roads, bridges, you know, water plants, all of those things. A few years ago, they looked at our physical infrastructure and gave it a solid D. While we're looking at our physical infrastructure, it seems to me we also need to take a look at our social infrastructure. As we go through this reset, we need not only the physical infrastructure, but we need to renew the social infrastructure, education, healthcare. We need to renew, how we feel about our environment, our economy, and all the rest. What happens is that with these changes in lifestyles, with these changes in technologies, we need whole new transportation systems. Think back to the agricultural age. We had a school system to fit the agricultural age. Along came the industrial age. We created an education system for the industrial age. And now we're moving into a global knowledge information age, and we need an education system that prepares people for a global knowledge information age, even an age of knowledge creation and breakthrough thinking. And the system is in the process of making those changes. For some, it's not happening fast enough. I suppose that's true for all of us. It's like putting a size 12 foot in a size 8 shoe. At some point, it no longer fits. If you look at transportation, we had carriage trails, and then along came these automobiles, those strange-looking things that people drove in the early days of the automobile industry when Henry Ford came along with the Model T, and they were driving on carriage roads. And it didn't work anymore. The automobile outgrew the roads, outgrew the infrastructure. You take a look at housing. We went from living out on the prairies, living out in the wide open spaces, to coming to the cities and working in manufacturing in inner cities. And then we had a tendency to move to the suburbs. And now, because of the cost of fuel, because of lifestyles, wanting to be near nightlife, wanting to be within walking distance or biking distance of the job, we want to live close to work. We want things to be more convenient. So, here's another concern in the economy. This nation, the US of A, has traditionally been a brain gain country. We've taken a lot of pride in the fact that we've attracted some of the best brains in the world. And there are brain drain countries. And unfortunately, there are some countries, many countries in the world, whose, I guess their chief source of gross domestic product is remittances. And of course, they need our attention, and we need their attention as well. We need to understand each other. We're going through a period of what we might call brain circulation at this point, because being a brain gain country doesn't mean that it's guaranteed. It doesn't mean that we will always be a brain gain country. It's something we have to earn each and every day, each and every year. I just would mix in here a personal concern about the need for financial and economic literacy. bottom line, we are not going to be able to simply ride our way into the future. We're going to have to invent our way into the future. Let's move into an economic, to an education and learning sphere here with trends such as personalization, ingenuity, and the depth, breadth, and purposes of education. I'm going to make a quick stop at each one of these items. First of all, personalization. We all want everything to be personalized for us. If you buy clothing, you want it to fit. You go to a shopping center, you go through almost any community, any neighborhood, you find tailors almost anywhere. And that's been going on for a long time. We want things to fit. I have one foot size that's size 9 and one that's size 8.5. You know, what am I going to do? Buy 2 pairs of shoes? So I buy a size 9 because it's more comfortable. But it would be nice to have that kind of personal tailoring so that I could buy one size shoe that's 9 and the other one that's 8.5. Hasn't happened yet, but probably will at some point. Also, our collection of apps on our smartphones. We want it tailored just for us, and we're the ones who do the tailoring. We select all those apps, tailor-made for us. You lose your smartphone, and it's a good chance you're going to feel really lost. If we work in education, if we work in business and industry, if we work in government and want the best from everyone around us, then we need to be interested in, we need to be concerned about, we need to be aware of the abilities, the talents, the skills, the aptitudes, the motivations of people. We need to be concerned about their interests, their dreams, their cultural backgrounds, other categories of diversity, and there are many, their national origins, their languages, other social and economic factors, and we need to blend all of that. We need to learn from all of it. We need to celebrate it. And if we're going to be effective in the education system, then we certainly need to celebrate it. And if we're going to be successful in personalizing education, we certainly need to be aware of those differences so that we can serve all of these various people who have a ton of differences in their experiences and interests personally. One thing I studied as we worked on this book, one thing that became immediately apparent from our Futures Council 21 was that education, lifelong learning, is becoming an anytime, any place, any pace, any way matter. Now that could sound threatening to people who work in education, and it shouldn't. So we need to take that concept and just incorporate it into how we define education. It needs to be a broader understanding of what the institution does. Lifelong learning that is anytime, any place, any pace, any way. Earlier, we talked about standards and testing. We talked about the scoreboard mentality. Have a problem with that. We're really into scores, we're into ratings and rankings. And I know we look at the PISA scores, we look at the TIM scores, we look at the Pearl scores, and sometimes we reach immediate conclusions based on those numbers. I talk with a lot of educators in a lot of places, and a lot of educators are telling me that they have a growing concern that their goals are becoming numbers rather than the students. We need to do better with these numbers next year, whoever the students happen to be. So I think that that's a growing concern among educators. So when we see those scores, those ratings, those rankings, rather than looking for conclusions, maybe what we need to look for are clues to give us some sense of what they might have to say to us. Now let's look at ingenuity for just a moment. We're talking, yes, about thinking, reasoning, problem solving skills. We're talking about creating intellectual entrepreneurs. You show me a person who is curious and persistent, and I'll show you a person who'll be fairly well educated for the rest of her or his life. So that's very important for us in global education, in any aspect of education, to create people or help people become curious and persistent. Need to help people see things in a new light. We need to do that ourselves. We need to be able to deal with paradox, controversy, complexity. We need to be able to conceive of new knowledge. As we look in those white spaces we were talking about between the trends, that's where we create new knowledge. That's where new knowledge is created. I've often thought it would be great at the end of a class if we said, think about what we discussed today. Think about what we discussed this week. Does that trigger any ideas for you? And there at the end of the class, the world would be a little bit smarter than when class got underway. Ed Wilson, you all know Ed Wilson. He's written a lot, talked a lot about the unity of knowledge. Think the world of Ed Wilson. And he encourages us to think across disciplines. He says disciplines are really kind of the remnants of putting things together in a way that we could more readily teach them. They're biteable chunks, but we live interdisciplinary lives. So even though we may study things in various disciplines, we go out into a highly interdisciplinary world. And as we deal with thinking, reasoning, and problem-solving skills, as you know, we can teach the principles of thinking, reasoning, and problem-solving, but we also need to teach students to ask good questions. And we need to ask good questions ourselves. Rather than just saying yes or no, we need to ask, well, who do you think might feel differently? What do you think they would recommend? What do you recommend? If you were doing this, if you were doing what you recommended, when would you do it? Well, why would you do it then? Where would you start this? How would you go about it? What are the steps as you see them? Why is this important? Why is it more important for us to do this than something else that might serve humanity? And we need to encourage positive, constructive risk. I don't know how many of you know Sir Ken Robinson. He's from the UK, of course, and the Sir says something about his being knighted. He claims that he was walking down the street at the right time and somebody just collared him and said, we're going to knight you, but I don't think it was only that. He's certainly a great representative of the UK. But he talks everywhere and talks eloquently. He says that we're educating people out of their creativity. And when you think about it, think about your own life, think about your own experiences. I can think about being in a meeting where, I've had this idea and I've had it for a long time and there's a pause in the meeting and I present my idea and the chair of the meeting simply goes on to the next item and doesn't even acknowledge it. Or somebody says, I wouldn't do that if I had all the money in the world. And you go out of that meeting saying, I am never going to present another idea ever in my life, it hurts too much. Or they take their idea with them and they take it to another company, another institution. Or they're an entrepreneur and they become your competition. So we need to make sure that we encourage risk and then that we can put up with it. Okay, let's talk for just a second here about depth, breadth, and purposes of education. I'm going to speculate on some purposes of education. I'm not asking you to accept this. I'm just trying to stimulate the conversation. I believe that math is important. I believe science is important. The arts are important. Global education is important. Language skills are important. All those things and more are important. I don't think they were meant to compete with each other for a slice of the budget. I think we have purposes that encompass all of them and more. So here are some of the purposes I think we should probably consider. One is citizenship. I think we need to prepare people to be good citizens of a family, good citizens of a school, a college, a university, of their community, of a country, citizens of the world. I believe that we need to foster, to stimulate employability skills. That doesn't mean that we train everybody for every job. It means that you have to know how to do math, you need to be creative, you need to know something about history, you need to have good language skills, you need problem-solving skills, thinking skills. All of these things fit with citizenship and employability. I think a purpose of education is to help people live more interesting lives. The more you know, the more interesting everything else becomes. Another purpose of education is to release genius that is already there. Nearly every person is a package of some kind of genius. Howard Gardner, of course, has gotten into that as he developed his multiple intelligences, and we're all some package of those multiple intelligences. And he, as he's written about 5 minds for the future. And I believe another purpose of education is to stimulate imagination, creativity, and inventiveness. Now, this raises a few questions for me. and I'm sure for you. One of the questions is, are we captives of the cognitive? Are we so stuck on things that are measurable that we can't even acknowledge that there are some things that are vitally important that aren't so easily measurable? Do we accept the need to learn across disciplines? This one might take a day or two at some retreat. How would you describe a learned person? We need to have that discussion more often. Let's move into the international global sphere. Here's how the trend goes. International learning, including relationships, cultural understanding, languages, diplomatic skills, will become basic. I say will become basic. I believe they already are. We're going to see a growing tug between isolationist independence and interdependence. For perspective, at the beginning we talked about the need for perspective. For every 100 people on this planet, about 60 live in Asia, 15 live in Africa, 11 live in Europe, 9 live in Latin America and the Caribbean, 1 will live in Oceania, and about 5% in North America. I go back to this concept that the world is as big for some people as the horizon, as far as they can see. Even if they stand on a ladder, that's how big the world is, and they see the whole of humanity by where they stand. We need to stand much taller to make sure that we put things in perspective. And you know, we have in North America 5% of the population of this planet. That's not a lot of people, and we consume 30-some% of the resources of the world. Tom Friedman, of course, wrote his book, The World is Flat. It's a nice piece of work, and most people have read it. Those who haven't read it are aware of it. So I applaud Tom Friedman for that work on The World is Flat. So the question is, how flat is it? Technology is taking us to a more level playing field. We're seeing this convergence we've been talking about, this connectedness, and it's reinforcing globalization. So this begs a question, and that is, has the world gotten so small, so fast, that our political systems can't keep up with it? I think it's a serious question that we need to talk about in global education, international education, but we need to talk about it in our communities. We need to talk about it in the media. We need to talk about it everywhere. We need to be the ones who start that conversation. National Research Council came up with a statement on international education in foreign languages a few years ago. And here's how that statement goes. I'll read it to you. The pervasive lack of knowledge about foreign cultures and foreign languages threatens the security of the United States as well as its ability to compete in the global marketplace and produce an informed citizenry. And this boiled out of a study that was done by the Asia Society and the Council of Chief State School Officers a few years ago. So what do we mean by globalization? There are a lot of definitions of globalization. I'm going to share just one here at this World Affairs Council meeting. This is from the 2012 Harvard Future of Learning Institute. Globalization, the accelerating traffic of people, capital, and cultural products around the world. It embodies opportunities and risks for individuals and societies worldwide. Now, you can expand on that, you can argue with it, you can delete whatever you'd like, but that's one definition. Here is what I consider kind of a startling fact when we think about what's happening internationally and globally. Comparing 2000 and 2050. World population in 2000, about 6 billion people, billion with a B, and move out to 2050. And the population is projected to be about 9 billion people, plus or minus. Now look at the less developed, the developing countries. We're expecting, according to the US Census Bureau's international database, we're expecting in those less developed nations, developing countries, a 60% increase in population. In more developed countries, we're expecting a 4.3% increase in population. Now that should get our attention all over the world. The only continent that's expected to register a decline is Europe. They're expected to drop about 3.2% in population between 2000 and 2050. Rowan Gibson is a leadership council and a really good one. He says the future will not be a continuation of the past. It will be a series of discontinuities. Linear thinking will not be enough in a non-linear world. So expect a non-linear world and you will not be disappointed. Here's another that certainly got my attention. We're expanding our cities in many parts of the world. And I thought we'd just pull this from our 21 Trends book and isolate it here so you can take a look at it. I know you're aware of it. In 1970, there were 2 megacities in the world. Now, a megacity is a metropolitan area of 10 million or more people. Again, in 1970, there were 2, Tokyo and New York. You move out to 1990, there were 10 megacities, metro areas of more than 10 million people. 2 were in the US, same ones, New York, Newark, the metro area, and LA Metro. You move out to 2011, there were 23 megacities of 10 million or more people. Same 2 were in the US. You move out to 2025, and there will be a projected 37 megacities, metro areas with more than 10 million population. 3 will be in the US. New York, LA, and add Chicago into that mix. 21 will be in Asia. Now, again, I don't make this up. This is from the U.S. Department of, the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs Population Division. All right, international global education. Some things to consider in the broad scope. I believe we need to educate people to have a range of diplomatic qualities and skills. So what do we mean? I mean, you can define it however you'd like. I believe we need to have people with open minds, natural curiosity, who have patience, who have courtesy and good manners, who have a sense of tolerance, who have the ability to empathize, to put themselves in somebody else's shoes. And I would add to that thinking and reasoning skills, problem-solving skills, language proficiency, technical and information management skills, the ability to negotiate, an understanding of intellectual and social skills that are a foundation for diplomatic behavior and protocol. I would guess that everyone with us here at this council meeting tonight would agree that we need a stronger focus on international, global, civic, law-related character education. They're fast becoming basics in this interdependent world. Well, let's complete my remarks by bringing it back to perspective. And I'm going to rely on Jane Goodall to do that famous British primologist and anthropologist. Jane Goodall observed, "We have inherited this planet from our parents. We have not inherited this planet from our parents. We have borrowed it from our children." And I'll let Jane Goodall conclude our part of the program tonight. Thank you so very, very much for being here and for the privilege of being with you. Thank you so much. And to all of you, thanks so much.
Yeah, I would like to seek your advice regarding 22nd trend, or maybe catch 22,
Okay.
to amplify your existing 21st, namely character development.
Yes.
Where do the young leaders supposed to develop the right character to lead in terms of realizing right from wrong, commitment,
Yes.
teamwork, all these value system, all these traits that are prerequisites to success in life and to good leadership?
That's a wonderful question. I don't think there's one answer to it, but if you look at character and ethics education, we teach it through precept. In other words, we teach the basic precepts of character and ethics, and then we teach it by example. So we need to, in our schools, our colleges and universities, do a lot of case studies. And in the 21 Trends book, you find about 2 or 3 pages, just individual sentences that you can use as case studies to stir discussion about character and ethics. I was really fortunate in having on Futures Council 21, Avis Glaze, who's from Canada. She's the former Chief Academic Officer for the province of Ontario, but she has an organization now called EduQuest, and she deals with character education and speaks about character education and talks about these trends, in fact, all over the world. I had an email a few days ago from Character Scotland asking me to write a piece for their newsletter. In fact, she had just spoken there. But I think the answer to it is we teach it through precept and example, and through example and case studies and so on. But I think taking the idea of teaching through example and case studies just a step further, I think it's up to all of us to set a good example for others to follow. Our children don't always have good examples to follow, even in their own homes. And I'm not talking about people of any single social or economic group here. You know, you can be very, very rich and not set a good example for your children. And you can be very, very poor and set a wonderful example for your children. A role model. Yes, a role model. Thank you for that.
Good evening. I'm Suzanne Bailey, and I'm
Hi,
a
Suzanne.
social studies teacher from Huntsville, Alabama. So here with the World Affairs Council. So,
Thank you for being here.
well, thank you. And you know, as a social studies educator, your talk raised so many questions. But as an econ teacher, what struck me the most, I guess I decided that I wanted to ask was, in particular, you said your personal need for economic and financial literacy. I was wondering if you could expand upon that a little bit. You know, why focus on that particular topic, and what would be some suggestions to an econ teacher about what we need to do?
Again, a terrific question. My point is that we shouldn't leave economic and financial literacy out of the equation. It's very, very important. I think we need to at least have some familiarity with everything from macroeconomics to how to balance a checkbook. I told my wife that the other day, and she said, "What are you talking about? Nobody carries checks anymore. Everybody carries a bank card." And she's right. But let's say balance our bank account. How many people balance their bank accounts anymore? Hardly anybody. You do, yeah, and I do. But we're getting to be a much smaller percentage of the population in doing that. We need to understand those things. We need to understand compound interest. We need to understand return on investment. We need to understand risk. And I'm not sure we're doing a really terrific job teaching that. And one of the reasons is not because we don't have outstanding economics teachers, but because we don't give enough focus to economics in the curriculum. I think we need to focus, among many things, on civic education and economic education. And they, in essence, go hand in hand. If you take a look at the broader scope here, again, going out to context, going out to perspective, and you all know these three circles. If we have an environment that can sustain us, then it's very likely we'll have humanity, we'll have living creatures and plant life and all the rest, and eventually it's likely that we'll develop some kind of society. So if we have an environment that will sustain us and we've developed a society, then it's possible that we might develop an economy. Sometimes we don't understand that economy doesn't come first. It's the product of the environment and society. And it doesn't necessarily go the other way around, although those of us who work in the economy need a better understanding about the needs of society and the needs of the environment, because without a viable society, without a sound environment, we're not going to have any customers. So it's a two-way street. I hope that helps a little bit.
Well, let me just start off with, as we know, technology is exponentially growing, and how much has the current intellectual property rights restricted or increased the growth of technology, as the policymakers are still part of the older generation? And to follow up with that question, what policy recommendations would you suggest to address this exponential growth of technology?
That's a big question. Let me take a stab at it, and if I get halfway through and I've missed something, would you tell me?
Yeah.
A lot of people in education are into open source. They would like to see everything open, so that we have access to it. And yet there are authors, there are publishers and so on who produce things, producers who produce things, and they need to depend on those things for an income. So they say there needs to be a gate through which you go and pay the fee in order for us to continue to buy food for our tables. So we have that tension that exists. The whole issue of identity and privacy, that was part of your question, right?
It's more like, I guess, how intellectual property rights are being managed by the older generation,
Okay.
you know, the policymakers. And with this new generation coming, you know, and the rise of technology, like how do we, you know, deal with this increase of this exponential growth of technology?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a growing demand for this whole idea of open source. We have the debate going on right now about, you know, the internet and access to information on the internet. And again, there is that old Detroit model of the pyramid, that you have people who are in charge, you have people who are there to make sure that the trains run on time and that we're planning for the future and all the rest, but there's the pyramid. So that is sometimes known as the Detroit model. There is also the Hollywood model. I have an older son who's a producer in Hollywood. He produces television commercials. He's done that for 20-some years. But in doing that, you know, he brings together these people who are the best in the business, the best he can get at the time he's producing a commercial. They work together for, you know, it might be a week, 2 weeks. They might work another week or two prepping and then doing follow-up, wrap-up. But then when that's done, they all go and work on other things. And then another commercial comes along and he pulls together the best people he can get to work in that kind of atmosphere. And that's part of the quote, Hollywood model. You have a smaller pyramid with people around it. And I do think that the big pyramid does hang on to a lot of these things. We have copyright laws, we have patents that people hold, and that's how they gain their livelihood. And I don't know how far that will push. I wish I had an easy answer for you, but I do think you're absolutely correct. There will be continuing clashes. It's not going to go away. I do think that if you look at people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and, you know, all these, the technological wizards, they have had to wedge their way into this system and sort of push it along. And the system is different than it was when they got involved because they've pulled it along with them. And I think that that's what's going to happen. I don't have a definitive answer on how it will look, but I know it will change, I know it will evolve, and I know that you're going to be one of the people who makes that happen. Thank you so very, very much. What a privilege to be with you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for World Affairs Today, a production of the World Affairs Council, Washington, D.C. Stay connected with us at www.worldaffairstoday.org.